I'm Doreen Whitlow, 71 years old, and the night my son raised his hand to me, the noise wasn't loud, but something inside me broke clean through. I was sitting at the dinner table, smoothing the napkin across my lap. When it happened, his palm struck my cheek so fast and casual you'd think he was brushing lint from his jacket. The room didn't gasp. No one rushed to stop him. A few chuckled even, and Jolene. His wife hid a laugh behind her glass. I didn't move. Not at first, just sat there with the sting still warm on my skin and thought to myself, so this is what it comes to. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been made small by the people you gave your whole life to. I was born Doreen Russell, raised in a little town outside St. Louis, back when folks still left their doors unlocked and you knew the sound of every neighbor's screen door. We weren't rich by any stretch. My daddy worked at the feed mill, and Mama cleaned houses on the nicer side of town. But they taught me how to stand up straight and say thank you. How to listen more than I spoke, and how to make something last long after the money ran short. I married young, right out of high school, to a man named Charlie Whitlow. He had big hands and quiet eyes, and we made a life that wasn't fancy, but it was steady. When Charlie passed in '92, it was like a chair missing a leg. Everything tipped for a while, but I had Mark, our boy, just 13. Then smart, polite, always asking how things worked. He was my purpose. I worked at the county clerk's office almost 15 years. Decent job, decent pay, nothing anyone would brag about, but it kept the lights on through recessions and rent hikes. I packed Mark's lunches, mended his jeans, sold off my wedding china to cover his SAT classes when his car broke down senior year. I walked to work in the rain so he wouldn't miss a single shift at the grocery store. That was the kind of mother I was, the kind who did without, so her child could have something. Mark was always bright, but something shifted after high school. He started staying out later, got cagey when I asked questions. I chalked it up to growing pains the way all mothers do. Then one night, the phone rang, landline. Back then, big, clunky thing on the wall. It was nearly midnight when I picked it up, heart already pounding. Mrs. Whitlow. The officer said, "You'll want to come down to the station." I drove over in slippers and a coat I'd grabbed from the hall. Mark was 16. They had him on possession. Cocaine. Not weed, not some teen mistake. No cocaine in his glove box. His coat even tucked behind the visor. They called it intent to distribute, said it'd stick. He sat in the holding room trying to look tough, but his hands were shaking. I still remember the way he looked at me like a boy too scared to cry. The detective laid it out plain. If this went to court, we were looking at real time, not juvie. And right then, something in me decided I wasn't going to let prison be his future. I looked that officer in the eye and said, "It's mine, my coat, my car, my mistake." He blinked, asked if I was sure. I nodded. The words sat in my mouth like bricks, but I said them again. "It's mine. I wasn't charged. The church helped seal the record, and it never made the paper. But I lost more than anyone ever knew. My job, my reputation, the way people looked at me at the grocery store. They all knew, even if they didn't say it out loud. Mark never brought it up, never asked what it cost me. He just came home the next day, dropped his bag on the floor, and asked what was for dinner. Like nothing had happened. And I just kept going. Paid the bills, late, took on quiet cleaning jobs, made sure he got to college, paid every tuition check with a smile. And when people asked how I managed, I said, "Oh, I just made it work." But at that dinner table the night of the slap, when Jolene rolled her eyes and whispered, "She's always trying to make things about herself," something in me started to shift. It wasn't just the sting on my cheek. It was the sudden clarity that no one, not Mark, not Jolene, not even my own grandchildren remembered or cared what I'd done for them. I looked across the table, past the full plates and polished silver, the kind that used to be mine, and I thought, they don't know who I am, not really. And maybe it was time they did, Because what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Evelyn, sitting just 2 seats away, clutching her purse, like always still had the cassette, the one that held every word of the truth, and that truth was about to rise right up from under the linen tablecloth. I stood outside the restaurant, the chill seeping through the sleeves of my blouse, as if it had been waiting for me all night. I didn't wrap my arms around myself. I didn't reach for my coat. I just stood there, hands loose at my sides, feeling the place where my son's hand had struck my face not 10 minutes earlier. There wasn't a mark, not a bruise, but I could still feel it. And not just the slap, but the silence that followed. The way no one said a word. Not even Evelyn. Not at first. 16. That's how old Mark had been when the phone rang past midnight. Back when landlines shook the wall and made your heart stutter before you even picked them up. The officer on the line said my name and told me to come down to the station. No details. Just that I'd want to be there. I remember pulling on a trench coat over my nightgown, slippers on my feet, no time for mascara or decency. Just keys in one hand and fear in the other. At the station, they walked me through what they'd found. Cocaine. Not just one bag. Several. Glove box. Jacket pocket. Even tucked behind the visor like he'd done it before. Enough to charge him with intent to distribute. The kind of charge that changes everything. The kind that doesn't care if a boy has a future. Mark sat in the corner of the holding room, curled into himself, but trying to look like he wasn't scared. I remember how his chin quivered when the detective laid out what would happen next. And I remember the way he looked at me, not asking, not pleading, just hoping. I told the officer it was mine. I said it like I'd practiced it even though I hadn't. He asked if I was sure, and I said I was. I told him Mark was driving my car. That coat was mine too. I said I'd forgotten the drugs were there. They didn't believe me, not really. But they let him go. They ran my record, found it spotless. And then they gave me the fine and the warning. A church elder pulled a favor, and the record disappeared before the week was out. But by then, the damage was done. Whispers travel faster than facts in a town like ours. The clerk's office let me go the following Monday. Mr. Langley didn't look me in the eye. He just handed me an envelope and said, "It's best we part ways before things get messy." I wore pearls that day, thinking maybe if I looked respectable enough, the truth wouldn't stick. But pearls don't mean much when your name's already been passed around a dozen dinner tables. By Friday, someone from the church called and gently suggested I step back from organizing the Easter bake sale. That was when I knew. People had made up their minds. I was no longer Mrs. Whitlow, the widow who always brought lemon squares and made the best flyers for the blood drives. I was just a woman with a sealed record and a son who didn't even thank her. At the store, people turned their carts when they saw me. At the salon, Janet forgot my appointment 3 times in a row. The first time I smiled. The second, I told myself she must be tired. The third time, I left without saying a word, sat in my car with the keys still in the ignition, and stared at the dashboard until I couldn't see it through the tears. No one asked if I was all right. They just assumed the worst and went on with their day. I stopped going out unless I had to. I took cleaning jobs in places where no one knew my name. I kept Mark in school, paid what I could, sold off my mother's brooch to cover his first tuition deposit, told him I found some old bonds and he never questioned it. I packed his lunches, wrote notes on the napkins, and waited for the day he might notice. That day never came. Even when Jolene showed up at 19 with her bright lipstick and sharper smile, I welcomed her. I opened my home, baked the pie she said she liked, smiled when she talked over me at dinner. When they got engaged, I helped with the invitations. When they married, I gifted them the silver I'd been saving for Mark's future wife, back when I still thought of her as someone I'd one day grow to love. That silver was sold 6 months later to seed Jolene's skincare business. $10,000, Mark told the table. Just enough to get the inventory started. I didn't say a word, just stirred my water and watched the lemon wedge float in quiet agreement. They didn't know where that money came from. I'd sold my grandmother's tea set, sterling silver, carved handles, wrapped in linen for decades. I'd always imagined passing it down, but instead, I handed it over to a man named Lewis at a secondhand shop 2 towns over. He gave me $9,200 and a look that said he understood what I was giving up. The rest came out of my grocery money. I told Jolene I'd stumbled across some bonds in an old envelope. She didn't ask what kind, just said thanks and moved on. Mark told stories at dinner about late nights in grad school, living on ramen, pushing through exhaustion. Everyone nodded along. No one knew I worked nights at a dry cleaner to make up the difference in his tuition. My hands smelled like starch. My lungs burned from steam. I'd come home to aching feet and no thanks. They never asked how I managed. I didn't volunteer. That's just what mothers do. We make it work. When they painted my bedroom while I was visiting Evelyn one weekend, they took down all the photographs. Every single one. "We thought it was time for something more modern," Jolene said. I nodded. That was how it happened, bit by bit, the fog creeping in. First, I wasn't asked to bring the deviled eggs. Then I stopped appearing in family photos. Birthday parties, beach trips, Christmas mornings in matching pajamas, never a trace of me. The captions read, "Grateful for family," and I'd sit there staring at my phone, wondering when I'd become an outsider in my own story. If I asked to be included, I was dramatic. If I cried, I was dramatic. If I reminded them of the things I'd done, I was dwelling. It was easier to be quiet. Evelyn was the only one who noticed. Every Sunday, she came with flowers from her yard or a bag of new tea she'd found. Sometimes we didn't even speak. We'd just sit together, stitching and crocheting like we used to. Her presence said what words never could. One Sunday, I told her I hadn't seen the twins in 3 months. She looked up from her yarn and asked if I wanted her to say what she was thinking. I said no. I just wanted her to sit with me while I felt it. She did. She always did. It happened before the slap, before the glass of wine. Jolene leaned in across the table and said, "Tell everyone that prison story again. You always make it sound so dramatic." The room chuckled. I said I don't think, but she cut me off. "Come on, you said it was some mix-up. Surely you can laugh about it now." Mark didn't say a word, just smirked. "Maybe she liked it," he said. "Free meals. Attention, structure." Someone down the table laughed. I smiled, the kind of smile you learn after years of being overlooked. My hand shook under the table. I pressed it to my knee to still it, counted the stitches in the hem of my dress. 12 across, 3 down. I'd sewn it myself, thinking I might wear it to Mark's graduation. Instead, I wore it to my own erasure, and across from me, Evelyn's hand slid into her coat pocket. Just one small motion, but I saw it. I knew the tape was still there. The one that held the truth no one else wanted to hear. I went to the bathroom just to breathe. I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I only needed a moment. The faucet squeaked when I turned it, and the mirror above it felt too bright. I looked at myself under the glare of those bulb's cheeks, still faintly pink where Mark's hand had landed. The necklace I'd worn, a strand of pearls I used to think made me look elegant, sat a little off-center. I reached to fix it when I heard them. There was a vent in the wall above the towel rack. Paint flaking around the edges, thin slats, letting sound travel more clearly than anyone in the next room might realize. I didn't move. I stayed still and listened. Jolene's voice was the first one I heard, low and sharp. "She's been off for months," she said. "You saw her hand shaking. Evelyn's the only one keeping her upright." Then Mark's voice followed. Calm, almost casual. "I know, but she'll never sign anything. You know how she is?" Jolene responded like she'd already thought it through. "We don't need to wait for nature to take its course. A few reports some documentation people will believe she's slipping. She doesn't even go out anymore. Mark let out a little laugh. You make it sound so shady. It's not shady, Jolene said. It's smart. We just need power of attorney. That house alone is worth a fortune. And I'm not waiting another 10 years. The words didn't rush in. They came slowly like cold water through a cracked window. I stood there, one hand on the edge of the sink, the other still near my collarbone, my fingertips brushing the pearls. I didn't lean closer. I didn't make a sound. Mark said something else, then his voice lower. She won't do it willingly. You know that. And Jolene, she laughed. A quiet laugh, but full of satisfaction. Then we make it look like it's for her own good. A few calls, a paper trail. If she pushes back, we've already got a case. There was a clink of glasses and someone said, to a smooth transition. I didn't listen to the rest. I backed away from the sink, steadied myself, and walked out of the bathroom like I hadn't heard a thing. The hallway was empty. I could still hear faint music from the dining room silverware on plates, the rise and fall of conversations I'd stopped being a part of years ago. I stepped outside. The air had cooled. I stood at the curb, not moving, not sure if I could. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid in bed and stared at the ceiling, my hands folded on my stomach, like I was waiting for something to be decided. In the morning, I brewed a pot of coffee that sat untouched. I didn't need caffeine. I needed clarity. They thought I was slipping. Let them. They thought I was fragile. Let them believe it. What they didn't know, what they'd clearly forgotten, was that I'd carried secrets heavier than this. And I'd done it alone. But not this time. That cassette tape, the one Evelyn recorded 6 years ago, wasn't just a keepsake. It was proof, not just of what happened to Mark, but of what I did to protect him. And it was still safe, tucked away in Evelyn's coat pocket at that very dinner. She hadn't waved it around. She hadn't said a word. But I saw her fingers resting against the fabric like a promise. The next day, I called her. I need to see Reverend Thomas, I said. She didn't ask why. She just said, I'll call him. Meet us at the church. I'll bring the tape. It was just the three of us in the back office. No choir, no pews, no stained glass. Just a folding table, a half-empty box of hymnals on the floor, and that old coffee maker that always sputtered before it settled into a rhythm. Evelyn poured 2 cups. I didn't touch mine. Reverend Thomas sat across from me. He'd known me since before Charlie passed, had come by more than once after the funeral with casseroles wrapped in foil and long silences that felt like kindness. I need someone who remembers who I was before I disappeared, I told him. Before I got small. He nodded. Then let's remember. I pulled the cassette from my purse and set it on the table. Evelyn reached into her bag and slid a manila envelope beside it. Inside was a typed transcript, notarized and witnessed. She'd been ready. She hadn't pushed me, but she'd been ready. I didn't know when you'd want to use it, she said, but I knew the day would come. The Reverend read through it quietly, page by page. His hands never trembled. When he looked up, his eyes were steady. Do you want peace? He asked, or justice? I took a breath. I want truth. Let them decide what to do with it. I won't carry it anymore. He folded the transcript and placed it in his jacket pocket. Then he looked at me like I was someone who still mattered. Then we'll speak loud enough to be heard. I nodded once. Evelyn reached across the table, her hand warm and firm over mine. I don't remember what we talked about after that. Just that the heater kicked on and the hum filled the room. Just that, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was asking for something I hadn't already earned. Because this time, I wasn't doing it for Mark. I wasn't doing it for anyone else. This time, I was doing it for me. My lawyer didn't say anything at first. He just looked at the cassette on the table like it didn't belong in a room full of file folders and leather-bound binders. I sat across from him in the same chair I'd used when Charlie and I first drafted our will. Back then, we were both healthy and hopeful, thinking ahead, making plans. Now it was just me, a little older, a little quieter, but no less certain. He finally leaned back in his chair and asked, "What would you like to change?" "Mrs. Whitlow, everything I said. We're starting over." We worked in silence for a while. I knew what I wanted. The house would be sold. The proceeds would go to a youth program, one that helped kids like Mark once was before the police station, before the silence. Every cent, not a dollar to be left lingering. He paused when we got to the line marked beneficiaries. "You're sure?" he asked gently. "Your grandchildren. They'll be fine," I said. "Their hands are already full of things I paid for." We added a clause near the end. Evelyn's name in clear print listed as the person responsible for overseeing the disbursement. Below that, a statement in formal language: no funds may be released to any individual who has attempted through coercion or legal action to alter the grantor's autonomy. He read it out loud before writing it in. "Do you want to notify them?" he asked. "No," I said, smoothing my blouse. "I'll do that myself, in person." When I left the office, the sun was already starting to set. I walked to my car without hurry. That night, I called Jolene and left a message on speaker so Evelyn could hear it from across the room. "I'm planning a brunch," I said. "Just family. This Sunday. One last gathering before I start traveling." Jolene didn't call back, but I knew she'd be there. She'd never turned down a catered meal or a hint of inheritance. I spent the rest of the week preparing. I didn't order anything in. I cooked it all myself. Peach scones, lemon tartlets, a rosemary quiche I hadn't made since 1987. I ironed the napkins, pulled the silver polish from the top shelf, and cleaned each fork and knife until it caught the light just right. The pale blue china came out of its box, the one with the hand-painted roses that had belonged to my grandmother. Each plate placed just so. On Saturday, I set my hair in curlers and sat under the dryer like it was any other Saturday from years ago. I pulled my navy dress from the closet, the one with the scalloped collar I used to wear to church picnics, and pinned on my mother's brooch an oval cameo set in brass, still bright despite its age. I didn't do any of it to impress anyone. I did it to remember who I was before I started making myself smaller to fit inside their lives. I wrote out name cards in my own handwriting, placing each one beside the folded linen. Not for show. Just so there'd be no confusion. I wasn't hosting them anymore. I was hosting myself. One final time. That Sunday morning was warm and still. Sunlight through the kitchen windows made the countertops glow. The candle in the center of the table flickered quietly like a small heartbeat. Jolene arrived first. She came in snapping pictures with her phone complimenting the setup like she'd already decided what caption she'd use. "We should do this more often," she said, brushing invisible lint off her blouse. Mark came in behind her sunglasses, still pushed up in his hair. The twins trailed after, already asking for Wi-Fi. Evelyn stood beside me at the edge of the room. Her hand brushed my elbow, a small squeeze. Nothing spoken, just steady. I took my seat at the far end of the table, not the head, not anymore. We served the plates passed around the glasses. Laughter rose and fell like waves on a quiet beach. Nobody asked where the food came from. Nobody noticed I hadn't eaten a bite. When the table was cleared, I stood up slowly and said, "I have something for each of you. Just a small token to mark the day." I passed out the envelopes myself. Cream-colored thick paper, their names written carefully on the front. Jolene gave a little gasp, already picturing a check. Mark tilted his head like he was bracing for a speech. They opened them together. The room went still. Inside each envelope was a photo of Mark at 16, his wrists cuffed, sitting in the police station, eyes downcast. Alongside it, a copy of the police report and a notarized transcript of the confession I gave. Evelyn's handwriting in the margins. Every word legal. Every fact impossible to refute. Nobody said anything. Mark looked at the paper like it might bite him. Jolene's fingers twitched, eyes darting between the document and my face. The twins just stared, their phones untouched. I sat down and folded my hands in my lap. Mark finally spoke, his voice brittle. "What is this?" I didn't answer. I wasn't there to explain. I was there to let it be known. Evelyn lifted her chin. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Let them read it. Let them sit with it. The weight of it. The silence that followed. Mark stood so fast, his chair knocked back. He waved the paper in the air like it would catch fire. "This is false," he said. "It's a lie. A twist." He turned to Jolene. "She's trying to turn them against me." "This is nothing. It was years ago." But Jolene wasn't looking at him. She was still looking at me. The twins were quiet. One of them whispered, "Dad, did you really?" "Don't talk," Mark snapped. "You don't understand." At the far end of the table, Reverend Thomas stood. He'd come at Evelyn's request. Hadn't said much until now. He pulled out his own copy of the transcript and read aloud, steady and even. "I took the blame so you'd have a future," he said. And all I got in return was silence and a slap. The words settled over the table like dust after a storm. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it again. Jolene shook her head. "She's doing this to control us," she said, her voice tight. "She's angry. She's old and alone." I looked at her then, not with heat or hurt, just plainly. "I am not alone," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I was. Once, but not anymore. Mark stepped forward. His voice cracked. "Mom, please. We can talk. We can fix this." I looked at him and said the one thing I'd been waiting years to say. "You had every chance to fix this." Jolene stared at the paper like she didn't recognize the name printed at the top. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then said quieter than before, "Is this because we made a few suggestions about your care?" I didn't answer right away. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded document, cream paper official seal embossed in the corner, and placed it in front of her plate. The candlelight caught the edge as it unfolded. "No," I said. "It's because you made plans for my death." Mark shifted beside her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence told me everything I hadn't wanted to believe. "I listened," I said calmly. "Every word through that vent. You weren't just planning. You were celebrating." He blinked at me, eyes wide. "We were just worried," he said. "You've seemed tired. Off. We didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I said. The room stayed quiet, the kind of quiet that fills your ears. The twins had gone still, their silverware untouched. Even Evelyn didn't speak. She just sat straight-backed and still watching. I looked back at my son. "When you were 16, I said I stood in a police station and gave my name instead of yours. I lied to protect you. I took the weight so you could finish school, so you could go on to have this life." He nodded slowly. "I know." "No," I said. "You don't." I folded my napkin and laid it gently on the table. I lost my job, my standing, my peace. And I never asked for anything, not even a thank you. But I expected respect. That was all. His voice caught in his throat. Mom. I looked at him, not the man at the table, but the boy I had once kept warm during storms, who used to reach for my hand in parking lots. You slapped me, I said in front of your children. Because I embarrassed your wife. Jolene looked away. You've taken what I had, what I saved, what I gave freely. But that slap, I paused, quiet. That told me everything else was never going to be enough. No one moved. I stood from my seat. You are no longer listed in my will, I said plainly. Neither of you. I've changed everything. Jolene gave a short laugh, shaky. You're joking. I shook my head once. That paper in front of you, I said, is a copy of the new trust. It goes into effect immediately. Everything house account savings will go to a youth scholarship fund, one that helps children like Mark once was. Children whose parents don't have to lie and vanish to save them. Mark sank into his chair slowly like something had given way beneath him. You had every chance to honor what I gave you, I said. But instead, you treated it like it was owed. The words stayed where they landed. I didn't fill the space after them. I just looked around the table at the glasses I'd polished, the china I'd laid out with care, the name cards with their careful cursive, and I knew I was done. The meal was finished. The truth had been served, and for once, no one reached for seconds. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip past the rooftops. The candle in the center of the table flickered one last time and went out. I picked up my purse. I don't owe you silence anymore, I said. That was it. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I just walked past the table, past the chairs that had once been filled with laughter, and out the front door into the evening light. Behind me, no one followed. And that was the first step. The cab rolled up right on time. Yellow paint faded at the corners, a little dent on the back bumper, like it had seen its fair share of sudden stops. The driver leaned out the window and gave me a nod. I handed him the envelope. Inside was a cruise itinerary 2 weeks along the Mediterranean coast. I didn't say anything more. He didn't ask. I slid into the backseat purse on my lap and looked out the window one last time. The restaurant doors opened behind me. Mark stepped out first, scanning the sidewalk like he expected me to be standing there still waiting, still listening. His dress shirt had wrinkled at the shoulders, and his hair had gone flat. Behind him, Jolene followed, clutching her phone like it might offer a way to undo what had just happened. Neither of them saw the cameras. 3 vans lined the curb across the street. Local news. Reporters stepping out with microphones in hand. One woman hurried toward the cab heels, tapping fast on the pavement. Mrs. Whitlow, she said, breathless at my open window. Is it true you took the fall for your son's drug arrest in '96? I didn't flinch. I didn't look back. I just gave her the smallest smile, the kind that doesn't need much room, but carries weight anyway. Let the truth set someone free, I said. Then I paused. I already am. She blinked, not quite sure what to do with that. Evelyn appeared at the curb beside the cab, calm as ever. Her coat fluttered at the hem. She didn't speak, just reached for the door and held it open like a sister would. Her eyes were damp, but she didn't wipe them. She didn't need to. The driver pulled away from the sidewalk, slow at first, then steady as we turned the corner. I didn't look back. The sun was lower now, touching the top of the trees. My purse sat open beside me. I reached inside and pulled out the trust documents. The signatures were crisp, the notary's stamp still fresh. I folded them once more, tucked them behind the zippered pouch, and snapped it shut. That night, I stayed at a small hotel near the port. Nothing grand. just clean sheets and a lamp that gave off soft light. The kind of place where no one asks questions, and breakfast comes with a little jar of jam. I called the cruise line the next morning. They confirmed my cabin was ready. Balcony view mid-deck. Enough space for one person to breathe to sleep, to stretch out without tiptoeing around someone else's needs. When I stepped aboard, I left the past on the dock. 2 days in, I stood on the railing in a sweater I'd knitted last winter and watched the horizon go soft and gold. Salt air, real salt air, not from tears, not from the sting of betrayal, just sea and wind and sky. I hadn't packed much. A few dresses, a pair of walking shoes. Evelyn had tucked a note into my suitcase folded between 2 cardigans. You did what most never dare, and now you go where they never will. E. I didn't cry when I read it. I just sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, holding it in both hands. On the 3rd morning, the ship stopped at a small port in southern France. I walked down the stone path along the shore. The breeze tugged gently at my sleeves, and I thought how strange it was to feel light without feeling empty. I passed a cafe with outdoor tables and bright orange umbrellas. A child at one table waved at a passing boat and laughed without looking back. I found an empty seat, ordered tea, and watched the boat shift in the harbor. No one here knew who I was. No one here expected me to serve a meal or explain a decision or laugh at the right time. And no one called me dramatic. Later that afternoon, I sent Evelyn a postcard. The kind with a watercolor sketch of the coast and a handwritten message in the corner that said, "Wish you were here." I wrote, "Got a window seat at breakfast." The waiter called me ma'am and asked if I wanted cream. I said yes. That was all. I dropped it in the mailbox outside the Port Authority and kept walking. The ship left just before dusk, quiet as anything. I stood on the deck until the lights from shore faded. Then I went back to my cabin, changed into slippers, and watched the news on the little television near the desk. There was a clip from the brunch, a still image of the table. Jolene mid-blink mark with his mouth half open, and the Reverend holding the transcript in both hands. The headline read, "Local woman breaks silence after decades of family secrets." I turned the volume down and watched the screen with no sound. I already knew the story. It wasn't theirs anymore. The news cycle didn't last long. A few local interviews, a short radio segment. Someone clipped the Reverend's reading of the transcript and posted it online. The video made its way around town before the weekend was over. I stayed quiet. I didn't take any calls. The cruise ship moved from one coast to another, calm and steady, just like I needed. Back home, Evelyn kept me updated short messages in her handwriting, tucked into envelopes with flower stamps. Jolene stopped by this church yesterday. Didn't stay long. Left with tight lips and no eye contact. A few days later, Mark called here. Wanted to speak to the Reverend. Didn't leave a number. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. By the time I got back, the weather had shifted. Late spring. Lilacs blooming along the back fence. My lawn had been mowed. Evelyn's doing, I guessed. There were no messages on the machine, no envelopes in the mailbox. Just quiet. 3 weeks passed before Mark reached out. He showed up on a Wednesday afternoon, standing on my porch with his hands in his pockets. His shirt was wrinkled, and he hadn't shaved. I saw him through the front window, standing behind the screen door, unsure if he should knock. He did. I opened it, but didn't invite him in. "Mom," he said, "can I talk to you?" I didn't say no. I didn't say yes. I just stepped back, and he took it as permission. He sat on the edge of the armchair like it might break if he leaned too hard. "I didn't mean for it to get that far," he said. "I wasn't trying to hurt you." I waited. He rubbed his hands together. We were just We thought maybe you weren't doing well. Jolene said I held up my hand. Just once. Just enough to stop him. You made plans, I said, for my care. My estate. My rights. He looked down. You had conversations without me. Called people. Drew up paperwork. His voice came out quiet. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. He swallowed hard. You didn't seem like yourself. I wasn't myself, I said. Not for years, and none of you asked why. He looked at me then, really looked. You stopped showing up, he said. At birthdays, holidays. We thought maybe you were pulling away. I didn't argue. I just nodded. You never told us you were hurting. I looked at him steady. And when I did, you called me dramatic. He blinked, said nothing. I stood and walked to the bookshelf, picked up a small photo frame, Mark at 12 standing next to Charlie in front of the old oak tree. His eyes, bright face, still round with childhood. I held it for a moment, then placed it face down on the shelf. You made choices, I said, and so did I. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't realize how much you carried. I let that hang in the air. You still made plans for my death, I said. He shook his head. It wasn't you toasted to it, I said quietly. He closed his eyes. I didn't need more. I'd already said what needed saying. I walked him to the door. He stepped outside, but before he left, he turned back. Will you ever forgive me? I looked past him to the street, to the neighbor's dog sleeping in the shade of their porch, to the mailbox Evelyn had painted for me last spring. I've already let it go, I said. But forgiveness isn't something I owe. It's something you earn. He nodded like he understood. Then he walked down the steps and into his car. I didn't watch him drive away. The house felt still when I stepped back inside. Not heavy, just still. That night, I made a cup of tea and sat on the back porch, the kind of evening where the sky doesn't know if it wants to be blue or gold. The wind carried the sound of someone mowing 2 streets over. Somewhere, a screen door slammed. I thought about everything that had been said, everything that hadn't. I thought about how quiet the world gets when you stop asking for permission to take up space. Then I reached for a blank note card and wrote one sentence across the top. Tomorrow, I begin again. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Not out of habit, but because I wanted to. The house was still and cool, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like time has paused, just for a little while. I moved slowly, poured myself a cup of coffee, and opened the curtains wide. The sky was a soft gray, and the dew on the lawn shimmered like frost. I stood there barefoot for a moment, just watching the light change. After breakfast, I drove out to the cemetery. I hadn't been in months. Not since the last time I'd stood between those 2 names etched in stone, Henry Weston, beloved husband, and Charlie Weston, our shining boy. Evelyn had left fresh flowers, purple and white. I brushed off a few stray leaves and sat on the bench nearby. I'm all right now, I said out loud, more to the air than to them. I'm not angry anymore. I sat there a while longer, thinking about the years I spent keeping everything together with tape and thread. The way I'd tried to be small enough, quiet enough, agreeable enough for people who decided they didn't want to see me as a person. Just a task, a burden, a detail to manage. But those days were over. When I got home, there was a letter waiting for me. No return address, just my name in familiar handwriting. Inside was a note from Jolene, just a few lines. She'd taken a job in another state, said she needed time to reflect and step away from old patterns. She hoped I was well. She hoped someday we might talk again. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt still. Evelyn stopped by later that week. She brought cinnamon rolls and a fresh quilt she'd made in shades of blue and cream. We sat on the porch with our tea, watching the wind stir through the trees. "You're different," she said quietly. "Lighter." I nodded. I let go of what wasn't mine to carry. She smiled, slow and knowing. We didn't need to say much after that. Some friendships don't require filling the silence. That fall, I hosted a dinner, not a holiday, not a birthday. Just a long table under the oak tree out back, lanterns strung from branch to branch. Evelyn came. So did Nora and a few others from town who had stood by me through the storm. We passed food, told stories, and laughed until our sides ached. When the wind picked up, I handed out blankets and poured hot cider into chipped mugs. There was no tension, no proving, no pretending. Just people who saw each other and stayed. I realized then that family isn't always the people who share your blood or your last name. Sometimes family is the neighbor who checks on you in the rain, the friend who sits beside you in court, the lawyer who speaks when your voice shakes, the ones who listen when no one else will. And as for my children, whatever bridges remain between us, they'll have to decide if they want to cross them. I won't rebuild them alone. I've learned something in all of this. You can lose everything, respect connection, even the home you built with your own hands, and still come back to yourself. Stronger, clearer, quieter, maybe, but not small. You don't have to stay where love won't live. You don't have to keep giving pieces of yourself to people who only want you when you're easy to manage. You get to choose who walks beside you. And sometimes, walking alone for a while is the most sacred kind of peace. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. If it stirred something in you, I hope you'll take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear. They're not alone. And if you'd like to stay a while, I'll be right here next time with another story, another voice, and another beginning.